Hi, welcome to Give Me the Bible, where God's Word speaks for itself. In continuing our discussion of interpreting parables, remember there are 3 steps to interpreting parables. First of all, you want to understand the context, both before and after the parable, because that helps us understand why Jesus told the parable and what lesson or lessons he was trying to get across with that earthly story with a spiritual meaning. The second point is to understand the earthly story. Just understand what language Jesus is using to make the point in the story, and to just understand and appreciate on a superficial level the story that Jesus is telling. And then and only then can we go to the third step, which is to make the spiritual application that Jesus is really driving at, the spiritual meaning of that earthly story that he tells. So let's talk about that second step. Let's just understand the physical surface level of the story that Jesus tells. For instance, in Luke 7, we'll use this again. Luke 7, we talked about it in the last video, not very much in detail, but notice Luke 7 in the parable of the 2 debtors. Very simple parable. He says in verse 41 of Luke 7, a moneylender had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50, and when they were unable to repay, he graciously forgave them both. So which of them will love him more? So again, in this step, we don't want to think about the spiritual application at all. This is not the time to do that yet. We simply want to understand the physical story. What is Jesus saying here in this parable? And really, this one's pretty simple. You have a moneylender who loaned money to 2 different people. And one of these people he loaned a lot more money to than the other. Neither of them could repay this, so it was a big debt for both of them. But the point is, one of them owed a lot more, and neither of them could repay. And because the moneylender was merciful and gracious, he said, all right, let's wipe the slate clean. Neither of you owe me money. And Jesus' question is, which one will appreciate that more? Which one of these 2 borrowers would appreciate being forgiven of that debt more than the other? And the answer is pretty obvious. Simon actually gets it in verse 43. He gets it right. Well, the one who owed much more. Really, that's step 2 for this parable, but there's a little bit more depth because it's not always this simple. The reason it's not always as simple is because, remember, the Bible was not written directly to us. It was written directly to people in a specific time in a specific culture. And so that means the language Jesus uses in his parables is language that they would be able to relate to, and it would resonate with them. But because we're so far removed from that culture, it can be difficult, this second step, understanding just the physical story that Jesus is telling, because we don't always relate to the language. For instance, even in this very simple parable in Luke 7, in verse 41, Jesus mentions denarii. Well, we don't automatically know what denarii are because that's not the currency that we use. We use dollar bills, we use quarters, nickels. If you're in different countries, you've got the euro, you have other sorts of currency. But it's going to take a little research to find out, okay, what is a denarii? And when we do that, it's amazing because it makes the parable come that much more to life and be even more meaningful. Because when you understand what a denarii is, well, really denarii is plural for a denarius, and a denarius is 1 day's wage. So that means that this man over here, he owed almost a year and a half's worth of wages, whereas this guy down here, well, he owed almost 2 months' wages. We would agree that's a lot for both of them, but clearly this one owed so much more money. And that's why when we understand just this physical, superficial level of the story, it helps us appreciate the meaning of the parable even more. And really, all the parables are going to be like that. We're going to have to do a little work and a little research because Jesus will use language about agriculture, farming, planting, gardening. And if those are things that we're not used to in our industrialized society, well, we're going to have to work to figure out the meaning. He also talks about customs of the day, about wedding customs, wedding feasts, and the relationship between the bride and the bridegroom, and the virgins that wait for for the bridegroom to come, and they've got their lamps trimmed and all these things, all these different things that Jesus says in language that we don't immediately relate to. And so in order to get this step number 2 down in understanding the purely physical meaning of the story, that is going to take a little work. It's not always going to be so simple and easy. But I hope you understand and that it's clear that we've got to do step number 2 before we get to number 3. I hope that that's clear and helpful, and Lord willing, I'll see you next time.